Let me ask you something. What happens when the strongest wall finally gives way? When someone who's spent their whole life avoiding connection, dodging vulnerability, and hiding behind silence finally cracks wide open. I'll tell you what happens. Truth explodes, and it's raw and it's painful, but it's also the beginning of something real. Avoidants are not heartless, they're not cold, they're hurt. Deep down, there's a version of them that craved closeness and got burned. So what did they do? They built walls. High, thick, impenetrable walls. Not because they wanted to be alone, but because being alone felt safer than being rejected again. But life has a way of forcing a mirror in front of you. And there comes a moment, a breaking point, when the emotional detachment can't protect them anymore. That moment doesn't come with fireworks, it comes with silence that feels too loud, with regrets that hit harder than rejection, with missed opportunities they can't rewind. That's when the avoidant is no longer avoiding. You know why? Because the cost of staying shut down becomes unbearable. Here's the twist. The breaking point isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It's lying in bed at 2 a.m. and realizing they pushed away someone who actually cared. It's watching that phone light up and not recognizing the number anymore. It's hearing the echo of their own excuses bounce back empty. And in that moment, they feel it. The wall crashes down, all the "I'm fine" fades, and what's underneath? A heart that's been screaming into a pillow of pride, a soul begging to be seen, and it terrifies them. Because now they can't hide behind silence anymore. Now they know they have to face what they've run from, themselves. But let me be clear, that breaking point is not the end, it's the door. It's scary, yes, but it's also powerful, because when you've spent your life avoiding emotion and you finally sit in it, you're no longer just surviving, you're finally living. If you're the one who walked away from the avoidant, don't carry guilt. You weren't the trigger, you were the mirror, and if you are the avoidant, it's not too late. The wall may be broken, but that doesn't mean you're broken. It means there's room now, for healing, for real love, for change. No more hiding, no more blaming others for the distance you created. Face the pain, walk through the rubble, and on the other side, you find the version of you that's been buried under all that armor. Avoidants are often misunderstood. People label them as cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable, but that surface behavior hides a deeper truth. The walls they build around themselves are not a reflection of indifference, but of pain. These walls weren't created out of arrogance or cruelty. They were constructed over time, brick by brick, through repeated experiences of emotional harm, rejection, or abandonment. At some point in their lives, they learned that closeness could be dangerous. So instead of risking hurt, they learned to retreat. Their silence is a shield. Their space is a form of protection. The avoidance is their survival strategy. Underneath the tough exterior, there's a deep desire to be loved, seen, and valued. The irony is heartbreaking. What they want the most is exactly what they're pushing away. But it's not because they don't care. It's because they care so much that the possibility of emotional harm terrifies them. Vulnerability to them feels like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there's a net below. So they don't step. They stay safe behind their walls. They convince themselves that independence is safer than intimacy, that emotional detachment equals emotional safety. They choose control over connection. The behaviors of avoidance can look like indifference, but what's really happening is that their nervous system is wired to protect them from what feels like emotional threat. They withdraw not because they want distance, but because closeness feels overwhelming. They may ghost, pull back, change the subject, or minimize their feelings. But every time they do that, it's their way of saying, "I'm scared to get hurt again." And most of them don't even realize they're doing it. It's automatic. It's a habit rooted in fear and self-preservation. Avoidants often have a deep well of emotions they're afraid to express. They've been conditioned, sometimes by childhood wounds, sometimes by toxic past relationships, to believe that their emotions aren't safe. So instead of risking exposure, they suppress. They shut down before someone else can shut them out. They reject before they can be rejected. It's a heartbreaking paradox. They want connection, but they fear the cost of it, and in that fear, they isolate themselves. They convince themselves they're better off alone, but deep down, they're aching for the kind of connection they won't let themselves have. Many people think avoidants don't feel. That couldn't be further from the truth. They feel deeply, but they've trained themselves to hide it, sometimes even from themselves, and that's what makes their walls so strong. These are not walls made of pride. They're walls made of fear, pain, and unhealed experiences. The avoidant is not heartless. They are hurting, they are guarded, and until that pain is acknowledged, until that fear is faced, the walls stay up. Not because they want to push people away, but because to them, keeping when most people think of a breaking point, they imagine a dramatic moment, a fight, a meltdown, a door slamming. But for the avoidant, the breaking point doesn't usually look like that. It's not loud, it's not explosive. It comes quietly, in the spaces where no one else is looking. It sneaks in during moments of stillness, when the distractions fade, when the noise dies down, and when they're finally left alone with their thoughts. That's when it hits. The silence that once felt comforting becomes unbearable. The isolation that once felt like safety begins to feel like a prison. Avoidants often move through life with a sense of control. They keep people at a distance, manage their emotions carefully, and avoid conversations or connections that feel too intense. On the outside, it looks like they've got everything figured out. But inside, there's a quiet tension always simmering, a tug-of war between their desire for connection and their fear of it. They tell themselves they don't need anyone. They convince themselves that shutting people out is self-preservation. And for a while, that illusion holds. But then come the moments when all of it starts to fall apart, not through chaos, but through reflection. It can be as simple as hearing a song that reminds them of someone they pushed away, or scrolling past an old photo, or sitting alone in a room that used to be filled with love, now echoing with absence. That's when the weight of their choices starts to feel real. The memories they tried to bury begin to surface. The numbness begins to crack, and what floods in is a quiet grief. Not just for the people they've lost, but for the connections they never allowed themselves to fully experience. The pain doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up in sleepless nights, unanswered texts, and the haunting realization that time doesn't rewind. The phone doesn't ring anymore. The person they thought would always wait stopped waiting. And in that moment, the avoidant begins to understand that their defense mechanisms didn't just protect them, they also cost them. They start to feel the absence of love more than the threat of it. That's the shift. That's the breaking point. They may not talk about it. They might still pretend everything's fine, but deep inside, something cracks, something shifts. It's not a breakdown in front of others. It's an internal unraveling that only they feel. And once it begins, they can't unfeel it. They can't go back to pretending they don't care. The silence that once gave them peace now feels suffocating. The distance that once felt like safety now feels like regret. And in that quiet unraveling, they begin to realize that maybe, just maybe, the way they've been living isn't protecting them anymore. Maybe it's only keeping them lonely. Opting out feels safer than letting them in and getting shattered again. When most people think of a breaking point, they imagine a dramatic moment, a fight, a meltdown, a door slamming. But for the avoidant, the breaking point doesn't usually look like that. It's not loud. It's not explosive. It comes quietly, in the spaces where no one else is looking. It sneaks in during moments of stillness, when the distractions fade, when the noise dies down, and when they're finally left alone with their thoughts. That's when it hits. The silence that once felt comforting becomes unbearable. The isolation that once felt like safety begins to feel like a prison. Avoidants often move through life with a sense of control. They keep people at a distance, manage their emotions carefully, and avoid conversations or connections that feel too intense. On the outside, it looks like they've got everything figured out. But inside, there's a quiet tension always simmering, a tug-of war between their desire for connection and their fear of it. They tell themselves they don't need anyone. They convince themselves that shutting people out is self-preservation. And for a while, that illusion holds. But then come the moments when all of it starts to fall apart, not through chaos, but through reflection. It can be as simple as hearing a song that reminds them of someone they pushed away, or scrolling past an old photo, or sitting alone in a room that used to be filled with love, now echoing with absence. That's when the weight of their choices starts to feel real. The memories they tried to bury begin to surface. The numbness begins to crack, and what floods in is a quiet grief, not just for the people they've lost, but for the connections they never allowed themselves to fully experience. The pain doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up in sleepless nights, unanswered texts, and the haunting realization that time doesn't rewind. The phone doesn't ring anymore. The person they thought would always wait stopped waiting. And in that moment, the avoidant begins to understand that their defense mechanisms didn't just protect them, they also cost them. They start to feel the absence of love more than the threat of it. That's the shift. That's the breaking point. They may not talk about it. They might still pretend everything's fine, but deep inside, something cracks, something shifts. It's not a breakdown in front of others. It's an internal unraveling that only they feel. And once it begins, they can't unfeel it. They can't go back to pretending they don't care. The silence that once gave them peace now feels suffocating. The distance that once felt like safety now feels like regret. And in that quiet unraveling, they begin to realize that maybe, just maybe, the way they've been living isn't protecting them anymore. Maybe it's only keeping them lonely. Avoidants build emotional walls because at one point they needed them. These defenses didn't appear overnight. They were constructed over time, often after repeated experiences of emotional pain, betrayal, or rejection. Those walls were meant to serve a purpose, to keep out the chaos, to prevent vulnerability from becoming a weapon, and to provide a sense of safety in a world that felt emotionally dangerous. And for a while, they worked. Those walls kept them from getting too close, from being too seen, and from being too hurt. They helped avoidants maintain control, remain detached, and convince themselves that emotional distance equaled emotional strength. But here's the truth they often don't realize until much later. Those walls might protect them, but only temporarily, because eventually, what they built to save themselves becomes the very thing that's holding them back. The avoidant relies on those walls like armor. They withdraw when things get too close. They deflect when conversations become too intimate. They tell themselves they don't care, that they're fine alone, that they don't need anyone. And for a time that feels true. They feel powerful, untouched, insulated from pain. But over time, that armor grows heavier. It stops being protection and starts being a burden. The solitude becomes numbing. The detachment starts to feel less like freedom and more like emptiness. It's often not until they lose something, or someone, that they start to feel the cracks forming. Suddenly, that safe distance doesn't feel safe anymore. It feels lonely. The comfort of avoidance begins to rot into isolation, and in that space, the cost of their emotional defenses becomes undeniable. They see relationships they let fall apart. They remember conversations they never had, apologies they never gave, feelings they never expressed. And the regret sets in, because while the wall kept pain out, it also kept love out. It kept out connection, intimacy, and the chance to be truly known. That's when the avoidant starts to realize their strategy no longer serves them. What was once armor is now a cage. The very thing that helped them survive is now the thing that's making them suffer, and they come face to face with a painful realization. They can't keep avoiding forever. Life doesn't wait. People move on. Time keeps ticking. And while they were hiding behind the wall, life was happening without them. It doesn't always come with a grand epiphany. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment, when they miss someone they pretended not to care about, or when they realize no one's reached out because they never allowed anyone close enough to truly stay. And in that moment, the avoidant understands that while those walls protected them once, they're now the reason they feel alone. The defense is no longer worth the cost. The pain of remaining guarded becomes heavier than the fear of letting someone in. And that's when the walls begin to crumble, not because someone forced them down, but because they finally see that they're standing in the way of the connection they secretly long for. When an avoidant reaches the point where their emotional walls start to fall, it's one of the most transformative moments of their life. For so long, they've hidden behind detachment, behind dismissiveness, behind carefully crafted independence. They've told themselves that emotions are messy, that vulnerability is dangerous, and that relying on others only leads to disappointment. So they created a version of themselves that seemed self-sufficient, unaffected, and completely in control. But this version wasn't their true self. It was a survival persona, a mask built to protect the scared, hurt, and deeply sensitive part of them that had been silenced for years. When those walls start to collapse, whether from the weight of regret, the shock of losing someone meaningful, or simply the exhaustion of constant emotional suppression. What's revealed underneath is not a broken person, but a real one. A version of themselves they've avoided for so long comes forward, sometimes in overwhelming ways. The feelings flood in: sadness, longing, guilt, tenderness, and even hope. It's confusing, it's frightening. But it's also a sign that they are finally touching the core of who they are. This moment is powerful not because it's neat or easy, but because it's raw and honest. For the first time, they are no longer running. They are no longer numbing or distracting themselves with work, hobbies, excuses, or surface-level connections. Instead, they're allowing themselves to feel, and in doing so, they're reconnecting with their authenticity. That's the beginning of a profound shift. The avoidant starts to recognize that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's truth, and truth is where real connection begins. They may look back at the ways they pushed people away and feel ashamed. They may wonder how many chances they lost, how many people they hurt while trying to protect themselves. But instead of using that shame to shut down again, this time, they can use it to open up. They can choose to grow from it. That's the difference. The walls were never about not caring. They were about fear, and now that fear is no longer in control. Their true self, flawed, emotional, loving, and human, is rising to the surface. They begin to understand that connection doesn't have to be perfect to be worth it, that they don't have to have all the answers before letting someone in. That love is not about guarantees, it's about presence. And the more they lean into this truth, the more the mask falls away. The more they realize that their true power lies not in how well they can protect their heart, but in how willing they are to share it. This is where real relationships can finally form, not ones built on guessing games and emotional distance, but on openness, transparency, and mutual vulnerability. As they begin to live from this place of truth, they stop surviving behind walls and start living in connection with others and with themselves. Hitting emotional rock bottom is often seen as a failure, but for the avoidant, it can be the most important turning point of their life. For so long, they've operated on autopilot, avoiding closeness, dodging emotional conversations, staying in control of every interaction to avoid feeling exposed to them. That's not just a behavior, it's survival. But eventually, something gives. It could be the end of a meaningful relationship, a period of prolonged isolation, or even a seemingly small moment that hits deeper than expected. That's when it all begins to crumble. And that collapse, as painful as it is, holds the opportunity for something far more powerful, a breakthrough. When an avoidant finally allows themselves to feel the full weight of what they've been avoiding, it can be disorienting. All the emotions they've stuffed down, grief, longing, regret, love, come rushing in like a tidal wave. They may cry unexpectedly, feel overwhelmed, or experience deep sadness they can't explain. These emotions have always been there, but they were hidden under years of coping mechanisms and emotional suppression. What they're experiencing isn't a breakdown in the traditional sense, it's a release. The protective layers are peeling away, and what's underneath is raw, real, and unfiltered. And in that rawness, something begins to shift. The avoidant starts to realize that what they feared most, emotional exposure, isn't as terrifying as they imagined. In fact, it's liberating. Feeling deeply, even if it hurts, makes them feel alive again. For the first time, they stop numbing themselves, they stop running. They begin to acknowledge that connection, even when it comes with risk, is worth it. And in doing so, they begin to reclaim parts of themselves they had long buried: empathy, tenderness, desire, and even hope. They start to question the beliefs that kept them walled off for so long. They challenge the inner voice that says emotions are dangerous, that people always leave, that vulnerability equals weakness. Through this emotional confrontation, they begin to rewrite the script. They start to see vulnerability as courage, not liability. They understand that letting someone in doesn't mean they'll be destroyed. It means they're choosing to live with an open heart. This breakthrough marks a powerful new chapter. The avoidant is no longer living reactively, stuck in patterns of defense and detachment. They begin to make conscious choices about how they relate to others and how they relate to themselves. They become more present, more expressive, more willing to take emotional risks. And while this journey isn't smooth or linear, it's authentic. Each time they lean into connection instead of away from it, they grow. Each time they speak a truth instead of shutting down, they heal. This emotional awakening doesn't erase the past, but it changes the future. They are no longer limited by fear, by defense, or by habit. They are free to build real relationships, to show up fully, and to live a life that's not about avoiding pain, but embracing life in all its depth, messiness, and beauty. In the end, the avoidance breaking point isn't a sign of failure. It's the beginning of freedom. When their walls come crashing down, they don't lose themselves. They finally find the version of themselves that's been locked away, real, feeling, and capable of love. Thank you for being here, for listening with an open heart, and for holding space for the truth that even the most guarded souls deserve healing, connection, and a second chance at vulnerability.